Ladies and gents, welcome back. We've been hearing all kinds of stories from all kinds of people that were involved with the Freedom Convoy that took place back in January and February. And well, we've been hearing a lot in the inquiry of points of view and whatnot. One thing that we don't hear a lot from is, well, anymore. We heard about this a lot in the live streams as it was happening, but not a lot of people standing out and saying what their opinions were at the time, that are Ottawa residents and people who lived in Ottawa at the time that it was happening, that were actually in support of, or maybe indifferent, but just as it came in, not having such a grossly negative impact or having that happen to them. So today I brought in someone who wrote an amazing article that I read some time ago and was wanting to share this and just looking for the appropriate way of bringing this one to the audience here. And I just happened to, through networking, find myself in contact with this gentleman. So welcome, everyone. David Maybury.
Well, thank you for having me on the show.
So you wrote an article a while back, and it was called A Night with the Untouchables under your pseudonym here. We have the Reformed Physicist, and the article here is called A Night with the Untouchables. And without me just diving right into the article, I wanted you to be able to explain a bit of this for yourself. How did this all begin, and how did we get here?
Well, it began not with me trying to write an article. What had happened is everybody, the convoy arrived on the 31st, 28th, the last weekend of January. And I hadn't been following it too much, but when they all arrived here, it was big. You had a lot of people downtown. And after that first weekend, people were on the streets. They were right under my bedroom window. So it's not like I'm near it. I'm right on top of it. That I lived right on top of it. The way that Ottawa is that you have Wellington Street where Parliament is, and then all the streets that feed sort of north-south. Kent Street was one of the main arteries that the convoy was on.
And we got a picture of it here. This is from, is this from your apartment window? Is this the view?
It's from my bed. That's from my bedroom window. That's my bedroom window.
Oh, wow. So you're right there. Yeah. You're right on top of it the whole time.
That's right. And so what really got me thinking about what was going on is in the news, they kept saying they're honking all night long. And it's not true. I slept over top of it the whole time I was here, and they never honked at night. So what I did is I went down on the Wednesday after the very first Wednesday. So this is still pretty early days. And I decided to talk to people in my streets, find out what they were here for.
So before you went down to talk on the streets, did you see the news? Did you see what they were saying?
Oh yeah, that's right. So that's right. So what happened was that people would say that they're honking at night, and then I think it was that evening, some of the Canadian news out of Toronto were saying there are a bunch of yobs with delusions of grandeur and all these kinds of things. And that's not what I saw. And at night, they were always quiet. So, I mean, it was loud during the day. There's no question about that. But during the night, there wasn't any honking or anything. So I went down at about 10 at night, and I decided to introduce myself and talk to people on my street. And it was eerily quiet. You're walking around those big trucks, and there's just the idling, right? Some quiet conversations in corners. And so I just thought, okay, I'm just going to talk to people and see what it's really like. And it was very, very different than anything that had been reported in the news. At that time, I don't think any reporters or really anyone had gone to talk to people on this in the convoy. They talked to people who were on the streets, people who were parked in their cabs. No one had done that as far as I could tell. I was looking at the news like everyone else, and there just was lots of people in Toronto talking about what it was like, but nobody at street level.
Lots of people who weren't there, who had no idea, because they're only hearing about what they hear on the news media. And like to be fair, I'm in British Columbia. I wasn't there on the ground, but I was following people. I had friends that had went out there, and I knew what my friends were like. And I knew they weren't these hillbillies and racists, misogynists, all these epithets that they want to throw at these people.
So what I did is I went out and talked to people for about 2 hours. It was light rain when it started, and then it ended up snowing by the time I got in. And I didn't intend to write anything. I was just actually wanting to talk to people and see what their stories were. It was fascinating. It was absolutely amazing. You had all kinds of different people there. You had Indigenous people, you had East Indian people, you had older people, people in their 60s and 70s that had driven up from the East Coast. You had young couples. You had everything in between. And so when I came home, it was a little after midnight, closer to 1 o'clock maybe. I decided to go to bed, and I couldn't sleep, not because of anyone honking horns, but because of thinking about all the stories I heard. And I thought I should just write about this. So I started writing at 4 a.m, and I finished by about 7:30, and then I posted it on my blog. And to be honest, I thought my friends would read it, and some of the people I play tennis with. And by 10:30, it had gone crazy. People were retweeting it. I'm not even, at that time I didn't even have a Twitter account, and I've never sent a tweet. But it was at my blog, because it's just my name, maybury.ca. I had the title Night with Untouchables, and people were sending that out, and it just went crazy. It was millions of reads. By the end of the by the end of the day, I had to switch servers. It was nuts. It's my own personal blog, right? And yeah, it went. I was getting a comment. I couldn't vet the comments fast enough. I was getting a comment about every 15 seconds for a week, and I had to shut it down because it was just too much. But yeah, I was just authentically going out, talking to people, and seeing what they were like, and trying to show the story of who were the people on my street. And
so why the term the Untouchables? And I think you touch on that in the article, but
yeah. So the idea is that it's quite surprising how many of the people I talked to in the convoy were vaccinated. It wasn't like you just had a whole bunch of people who were just angry at the world. You had a lot of people who had a very strong moral principle here. And so what you were told is I was hearing all these things in the media about whether there's a yobbish mob, and that it was sort of creating a feeling that, well, if these people support unvaccinated people, these are the kind of the untouchable people. I mean, these are fringe element people. These are, do we even tolerate them kind of language? And that says really that they're an untouchable class. And if you think about it very carefully, what we're doing is we're saying that there is a class of Canadians that are second and don't deserve the full protections of what we have what our liberal democracy is all about. And that didn't sit very well with me at all, and it certainly didn't sit well with the people who were on my street.
No, and that's why so many people, in my opinion, supported them. And we've heard the stories of people who sent $100 donations, $50 donations, $10 donations, ended up amassing over $10 million twice in the course of the time that they had gone out to Ottawa and other places throughout Canada. But I think the main message, and I don't think it was particularly about any of the particular individual members of the convoy. I think it was a movement. Like there's this is what really got me going with it, right? This is what made me want to talk about it with people online, was this concept of people saying, no, okay, this enough is enough. We can't keep going this way. Mm-hmm. As we know, with the COVID-19 pandemic and the harsh restrictions that the government and not just at the provincial or federal, municipal, all these levels of government were pushing so hard on all of us. I think this was what the big sentiment behind it was, and yeah, it wasn't a minority at all at the end of the day.
Yeah, you had if it was a minority, it was very it had a lot of support behind it. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing about democracies, is that it's very important that the majority doesn't run roughshod over the minorities. That's the whole point of a democracy. People say it's about the will of the majority, but it's much deeper than that. It's about accommodating people that are different than you. And that's something that liberal democracies tend to do very well. It's just, they can fail sometimes. I still think Canada is a wonderful country. I think this is an opportunity for us to learn. I think it's an opportunity for us to do better. But inside the seeds of our liberal democracy is the chance to do better. And the inquiry, whatever way it comes out, will, in the court of public opinion over time, we will see how Canadians view this. one of the things that really struck me about the entire situation is that, again, in the news, it said things that were, I felt, rather inaccurate in terms of the history of our country. They said that this convoy was unprecedented, and it's anything but. Civil disobedience like this to change the arc of our country has happened before. The Winnipeg General Strike of 1919 is a great example of that, and unfortunately, that one did end in violence. But the On to Ottawa Trek, 1935. We've had different periods in Canadian history where civil disobedience has been a wake-up call to the moral conscience for the majority to say, look, we maybe are on the wrong track. And sometimes it takes a little bit of time to figure it out. But a good country, I think Canada, a great country, can do that. It can figure out these mistakes and find ways to do better in the future.
But we are a nation of laws, are we not? I mean, if it was just the whims of the majority, you'd have 51% of the population lording over 49% of the population. This is a concept that's long stood. Our neighbors to the south, their founding father, I believe it was Benjamin Franklin, that said, pure democracy is two wolves and a sheep discussing what's for dinner. And that's the dangers of unfettered democracy. I mean, democracy is a great idea. It's a great concept for electing elected officials, but at the end of the day, we still are a nation of laws, and I believe
it's a representative democracy. And we are a nation of laws, and sometimes with civil disobedience, and like the strike in 1919 and these kinds of moments of civil disobedience reminds the majority in the democracy that they've gone too far, or that we need to figure out a better way to accommodate. And that doesn't necessarily mean everybody gets what they want, but I think it's an opportunity in this case here to learn how to do better especially when we're in a situation where there's a lot of fear and panic. I think it's incumbent upon all of us in our democracy to figure out a way to bring the temperature down, to find ways of creating cohesion, not division, when it comes to something like this. And that means finding ways to accommodate. It means finding ways to recognize there's a huge diverse population in this country with different ideas about how we should approach things. And it's important to recognize that if you don't do that, you're going to create situations where you'll end up with civil disobedience. And that I think is part of the tradition of this country.
Yeah, and I think I applaud civil disobedience. If you think something is unjust, standing up and protesting against something, a government policy, something that you find to just be redundant to the way we should be living as a society. I applaud anyone from either side of that to come forward. It seems to have been a little bit. Well, a lot of people are accusing the federal government of being skewed in their approach to this. There've been a lot of left-wing protests, and I'm not saying that the convoy. I think it would be misrepresentative to call the convoy a right-wing movement. But I think it was a working class movement. I think is the best way to put it. And there's a lot of left-wing voters, a lot of working class NDP voters, a lot of working class Liberal voters that are out there and supported this movement. It generally was a working class thing, but it feels that in Ottawa there seems to be this feeling amongst the working class that they'll support certain protests, but then they demonize other ones. And how do we square that circle? How do we make things right?
I think the tent needs to be made bigger, and that's something that is important to hear all kinds of voices that struggle, like people who, the people on my street, I think a lot of them didn't have very much, and I think they were quite brave to come out and do what they did. How do you make it so that we don't have to run into these circumstances in the future is difficult. I think that in North America, there's a very polarizing situation about which way we think government should go and what its place is in our lives. I think demonizing people and saying that they're either stupid or they're evil is not a good place to start. I think to recognize there's a huge diversity of ways of living, and that's something that we need to, when we talk about real diversity in a country like this, is about that people have very different ideas on how they want to live their lives, and maybe how they want to raise their families and what values they have. I think we need to find a way to accommodate all kinds of different people, and we can. We have a history of doing it. It's just very recently that things have become very sharply divided.
Yeah, well, it's tough because it doesn't matter what side you're on. The group that you end up becoming acquainted with wants to, be against. There's this team mentality, right? There's my team versus your team, and then it becomes a blood sport at that point. And that's the last thing we need.
Yeah.
The last thing we need in this whole situation. But one thing I like to do is I like to look at other people, and I try not to attribute malice where, maybe just mistaken, like someone's mistaken on a thing. I like to look at everybody and everybody's, and of course there are malevolent people out there, but most people, most normal people, they come to the conclusions that they come to when it comes to politics or how we should all live our lives, from a genuine place. And they're looking at it as like, I believe that this is the right way to take everyone and have a good society, a good neighborhood, a good everything. Where we disagree, I think, comes from people's misunderstanding of the other side's perspective. And I think that's what's really been damaged these days is looking at someone else and saying, oh, well, this person, I believe that their ideology is misguided, and I think that they're coming from the right place. Instead, people just assume that they're malicious and they don't like they hate each other or something like that, something along those lines.
Yeah,
I'm really trying to find a way out of that.
Well, in this circumstance, what I think we need to be very, very careful about is taking civil liberties away from people. I think, especially when there's a lot of fear, and I know the pandemic generated a lot of fear. I'm sure people who listen to your podcast have had family members that have been very fearful about COVID. In those situations, we want to be very, very careful about taking civil liberties away. There's a real quick tendency to see them who push back on that as the enemy, that they're in some sense responsible for the ongoing problem. Those aren't those are not very good things to be doing in a situation like this. So it's really important to find ways of bringing the fear down, sensible policy, and ways in which do the utmost minimum to curtail people's civil liberties. It's really, really important. You'll get the maximum buy-in from society if you can do that, including people who disagree with you.
So like my personal prerogative and the way that I see things is that the government has grown so large. It's grown far too large, and its power is all encompassing. It's intrusive into people's lives at this point. And I've always believed that a smaller government, and this is my purview, right? Everybody doesn't have to agree with me on this, but the government becoming so large, it's become this institution now where you have to have your guy in charge or the other side is going to exploit you. And I think that's where a lot of the fears come from, is when I want to get back to a country where, again, my personal purview, I'd like to get back to a country where it doesn't matter who's in charge. Yeah, that's right. They don't have much way of digging into my life and affecting my life so much that it doesn't even matter. And then we can get back to where, a percentage of the public vote, and some don't. And that's a very important statement, because the idea is you want a system or a situation with government that if your side loses, it's okay, right? You get an opportunity the next time to persuade people that maybe you're on the right track. And it's okay to lose, and you can come back. And when you create a situation where government becomes very large, you can get a circumstance, as you pointed out, where my guy has to win. It's an all-cost situation. We need our guy on the inside, whatever side you're on. And if we can't have a situation where we can accept a loss and say, okay, next time we'll do better trying to persuade people that we have important points of view, and then maybe we're successful the next time, and it's the other side's turn to lose, and they can accept it too. When we get in situations where everything it's this catastrophic situation, if you lose, and it's impossible to go forward, that's when a situation where I think, yeah, you're right. I mean, government's getting too large. It's getting too big when that becomes an all-stake situation. I cannot lose. We have to
do everything we can to win. Otherwise, might not be here for the next fight, for the next political fight. And I think that's a bad place to be in a democracy.
Yeah, really bad place, because then the end goal for any particular side is to have all the power, and that's really really at the end of we're starting to see this in other places of the world, and it really concerns me. And some people are making the accusation, oh well, we're just importing American style politics, but it wasn't always like this in America. And we're seeing it happen more and more around the world. And you're a physicist, but you also do data, and you know all of this stuff. Is this something that, like, is this a trend? Where do you think the origins are from this? There's theories out there. This is because of social media. This is because of other things. Well,
I think
I'm
a really good book.
Because sorry to cut you out. I'm just saying this because
no problem.
I'm a diagnostician when it comes to auto mechanics. And to find a solution, you first have to really identify the problem, and I think this is where a lot of us are having a hard time in this, is identifying where the cause of this divide is coming from.
Well, your listeners might have read. This is a very good book, and it's something I would counsel people to read. Is Capitalism and Freedom by Milton Friedman, and he diagnosed this a long time ago, back in the early '60s. The idea that when you do have a large government that's involved in more and more of the economic activity of the country, it really does put a lot of pressure on people to win, to get their piece. And as because everybody's tastes and the way they live in society is so different. There's all kinds of people in the world. People you look at and go, oh man, how do they live that way? It's just crazy. I would never do that. And they may look at me the same way. And the idea is, how do we live in such a society where not only do we get along, but we improve each other's lives? And in private situations, we do this all the time without even thinking about it, right? You go to a mechanic, you go to someone who may have ideas that you find completely batty relative to your own, but you find you get along perfectly well. You bring your car in, you trade in sort of that private world, and you find out maybe that your next door neighbor's mechanic isn't as bad or as crazy as you thought. But when all of a sudden it happens that it's all done through political channels, and everything starts to become political, what sports team you like, what kind of sports you like, suddenly all of these things become a political statement. That I don't think that's a good place to be. I think you want to. There are things that government does and can only do. But the sphere of that is probably much more circumscribed than people sometimes think. You probably want to keep it tighter than it is.
I get.
Otherwise, you get these problems.
I get your concept of, because I don't say free market anymore, because there's so much taboo to that. And Milton Friedman, obviously, a free market guy, but I call it the market economy, because like a lot of people don't know that Karl Marx was the one who coined the term capitalism, and it was a critique of the market economy. I'm a big fan of the market economy myself, not a big fan of communism, but I think it comes down to an ideological argument on the fundamentals of property ownership. I think is what that really comes down to, that argument. And I don't think a lot of people are really like to get down to first principles. I'm a first principles guy. Just like I said, I like to break things down to the main problem before I try to solve an issue. But I find at first principles, this is where you can really either win people over in an argument, not pwn the guy and make him look embarrassed in front of his friends, but actually win people over in argument. And that's to bring people to first principles. And I think that there's an ideological battle right now happening around the world, and I believe it's this battle between the proponents of a market economy, classical liberalism, as a lot of people like to call it, and a Marxist socialism, communism type mentality, however it metastasizes to people. And I think that the basic fundamentals of that, the crux of this argument, is whether or not we honor or protect property rights. And at the end of the day, that's what the market economy is all about. You can't have it. without first and foremost protecting people's right to property, the fruits of their labor, and then it comes down to themselves as well. Like you own yourself, and this is. And then on the other side, it would be, no, the greater good is what's the most important thing. And there's issues with the ownership of property. But I think with the mandates, the big thing that hit people the hardest, and I think a lot of people didn't realize this and couldn't articulate it, but it hits at the fundamental level of property ownership and the right to self-ownership. And
I think it even goes further than that. I think it's the bodily autonomy, right? Under which circumstances should that be surrendered, and what are the boundaries to which you can say that even your body is something that is at play and question. And I think, again, you got to be very, very careful about circumstances where you say that is no longer the case. You're not a ward of the state. That's the whole idea, is that you're an individual, a person who has dignity and
you own
rights
yourself.
In our society.
You are the owner of your own self.
That's right. So if you're going to say that there's a circumstance that's so threatening to humanity that we have to suspend that, you need to be. This has to be done with the most extreme carefulness. It can't just simply say, maybe it's precautionary. We're going to do this because it's for the common good. You can't. No, you got to be much more careful than that. And it's really clear in the case of the mandates. Even in the summer of 2021, the CDC director, Walensky, was saying, she said in CNN that we can't trust the vaccines to stop transmission. And the case of where government can make the case that suspensions of civil liberties they can make the argument easier, is when certain people's behavior harm others, right? So, discharging a shotgun in your backyard because you like shooting things in your backyard in a city, well, that might be a little bit dangerous for other people. You might have to have some restrictions around that. But the idea is saying, look, you have to get the vaccine, and if you don't get the vaccine, you're part of the problem, because you're going to spread COVID to other people, even if you're not harmed yourself. So your decisions are harming other people. You now have to have the evidence that says that's precisely what's going on, and the effect size has to be large enough that it's catastrophic if we didn't do something like that. If it's like an alien, the Andromeda strain or something like that. But what we had with COVID-19 is this clear understanding that the COVID vaccines were not particularly effective at preventing transmission, hence the Omicron wave that we saw right across the country. If the primary benefit of the vaccine is to the person taking it, and a person, for whatever reason, I don't care what the reason is, decides that they don't want to take the vaccine, and if anyone is going to be making a mistake in that situation, is the person not taking it or the person taking it, whatever the case may be, that's up to them, because they're not damaging others by not getting the vaccine. There's no direct damage. When people say things like, well, they put extra pressure on the healthcare system, that's indirect damage. It's not what we mean in economics by externalities. You can't say,
turned out
well,
not to be true as well, though. So Freedom,
that's right.
FOIA requests have shown that there was actually less hospitalization during the.
That's right, but even if one was to make the argument, and it were true that it did, it's still insufficient to take away your bodily autonomy.
Right,
to
it's
say,
still not a good argument.
Oh, by the way, it's not a good argument, right? The only kind of argument you can make in such circumstances is that it's the Andromeda strain. It's going to kill every human on the planet unless 99.999% of the people are vaccinated. And if that one person isn't, all of humanity is going to go extinct. Okay, you can start making cases now that, look, maybe that guy has to live on an island, or we all got to get vaccinated, whatever the case is. But the bar gets raised higher and higher and higher to do that, to take, to say that people's bodily autonomy can be superseded by the state. It has to be enormously clear, and it has the effect size, like I was saying, has to be absolutely tremendously huge. And what it was clear, even in the summer of 2021, right after the vaccines were being introduced, that they were not particularly effective, or really effective at all at preventing transmission. And so now the case that you should be taking people's bodily autonomy away just falls apart completely. And then what happens when you insist on it, because maybe there are people who are fearful, and I'm sure there were people who legitimately believe that if my neighbor's not vaccinated, my kids are going to get sick. I'm sure there are people that legitimately believe that. Now it's really important for the government to bring down the temperature, to find a way to proceed to make sure that people are not as afraid. And finally, what I would say is this: if you have a position that you really like people to get vaccinated, that it really is important, the right answer isn't to take people's jobs away. The right answer isn't to threaten them with economic hardship. We never do that when we go into developing world countries that have problems with polio vaccination campaigns. We don't go into villages and say, listen, your religion is silly. Stop believing these things. If you don't get the vaccine, we're going to take your livelihood away. The NGOs and the United Nations works very, very hard to persuade people, because if you do the heavy-handed thing, you're going to vaccinate maybe that one village, and you're never going to vaccinate anything else again. And they might come after you with physical harm the next time you go in, and you're never going to win doing that. So if it was very important in our own country to vaccinate our own citizens, if you were on the side that says, I really want them to get vaccinated, I don't understand why they're not choosing to, okay, fine. Then be sensitive. Go in and talk to people. Persuade in a way that doesn't threaten their families or threaten them with hardship. That is just, it's something we never do outside of this country. Mm-hmm. When we're trying to promote vaccination. We shouldn't be doing it inside our country. It's surrendering bodily autonomy and our civil liberties to this is incredibly divisive, and it's harmful. And I don't think in the end it actually is part of a good public health initiative.
I think what's angered people so much since we started getting more data on COVID-19 and how it's spread around, how infectious it actually is, but as the new variants come along, how it's much less harmful to a majority of people. And that isn't to say that some people don't get really, really sick, and that does happen. And it's a small amount of people, and that does happen. But the more we learn about it, the more we find out that it's okay, and we're doing better. The more our government seems to be gaslighting us on the mm-hmm. subject, and they're getting harder and stricter on certain things. They're even threatening to bring back mask mandates this fall, bring back vaccine mandates for particular jobs around government and anything that works through or through government, essentially, like airlines and whatnot.
I really hope that that sort of saner heads prevail on that. I think that I'm encouraged by seeing, to be honest, I'm encouraged on seeing Ontario's top doctor not wearing a mask at the Toronto Life magazine situation, because I think it just shows everybody. It's kind of like, look, infectious diseases, respiratory diseases have their place in our society. They're endemic. Okay? Mm-hmm. They're not going away. And the issue is that we can't say that we're going to suspend life forever. One of the things I do see is that, and I actually wrote a blog piece about this on my blog about, I mentioned how we had to cancel cancer surgeries and that there's overflow in the hospital. And so when I set up my blog post and I explain it, but I showed that was actually all news stories from 2017. The flu in 2017 was particularly bad in Canada, mm-hmm. and it caused certain hardships in the hospitals. They had hallway medicine in Toronto. So what it shows you is that the healthcare system, the way we've set it up, it's very brittle, and if it gets pushed on by a stiff breeze, it's suddenly hallway medicine. And so it really says, look, the solution to this problem isn't, let's everybody wear a mask or change their behavior. And I actually find I'm a little bit resentful of the whole thing for the following reason. If the government decided, provincial or otherwise, said, we're going to contract healthcare, so there's only one hospital in Ontario, and it will be in London, Ontario. That's the only place where we have a hospital. So now everybody has to change their behavior drastically. You can't drive a car because you might get hurt. No one's allowed to go skiing. No one's allowed to go for a marathon, participate in a marathon, because all these things will put pressure on the healthcare system if they get hurt, because we only have the one hospital. So the idea of asking everybody else to modify their behavior, and I'm just talking about normal behavior, just going to a bar, going out to see friends and saying, no, you should wear a mask because it's your duty to save the healthcare system. Actually, no, we're not wards of the state. If we have collectively made poor choices in our democracy regarding our healthcare system, then that's something that we need to own, and it's something we need to fix. And the argument can't be, well, everybody needs to modify their behavior, because there's no end to that. I mean, the government can say, we're going to contract healthcare even more, and now we're going to put limitations on how many hours anybody can do downhill skiing in a year.
And it gets worse than that, though. So we even had news media. I know we're used to seeing it on Twitter, the hyperbolic people saying, just throw them under a bus. Who cares? Get rid of those people, the unjabbed, the unvaccinated, filthy masses. But we actually had, I saw a global poll that went out just the other day, and it was, what should we do with people who refuse vaccines? And the options were cut them off from the medical service.
Yeah, that's right. Or impose punitive taxation. The Quebec had suggested that as well earlier this year. I look at these things and I think, look, this is the wrong path. This is going to create more divisions. The one thing you have to be really careful about is people who have very strong convictions about not getting vaccinated. If you're going to threaten them by taking their livelihood away and they still won't change their behavior, these extra things that you're doing might make you feel good, maybe makes you feel righteous doing that, but it's not going to modify their behavior. And if the goal was, look, I really, really want these people to be vaccinated, this is not the way forward. Because if they've dug in this far, they're not going to say, well, now you've done that one last punitive thing you've done to me, I will now change my mind. Maybe you get somebody on the margin changing their mind, but overall you're not solving the problem. So I don't think this is the correct way. I think there are people who are fearful of vaccines, just as there are people who are fearful for COVID. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to find a way to help people feel less scared, more confident in their own choices, and get back to thinking, if you want to do public health properly, how to create a society that is accommodating and less fearful. Because that anytime you have a public health emergency and you find ways to create more fear, to suggest that even though you know that vaccines are not particularly good at preventing transmission, to now make people fearful of those that didn't get vaccinated, this is not helpful.
But not only do people get fearful, but they get conspiratorial. And this is what is what wraps up a lot of people in these stories, and some of them, like some of these stories, they come from fantasy, and some of them they come from places of genuine reality. So there are forces in the world. There's a lobby group that everyone likes to talk about on the world stage called the World Economic Forum. It's a lobby group of billionaires, and they like to pat their own backs about how great they're doing and showing forward ideas. Their founder likes to claim that he's infiltrated the cabinets of governments around the world, and then he parades at G20 summits with them, and it lends to a lot of people thinking that there is an absolute power there, like they wield absolute power. When I don't believe that they wield absolute power. They're a lobby group of any other lobby group, and they try to peddle influence, and they may not be for, and I personally, I see them as an anti-democratic establishment. They're positively going out there saying we're subverting the will of the people with our own lobby group, and getting them to go along with these new ideas that the masses may or may not want to go along with. But where do we go from there?
So what it is a form of in the economics world, is called rent seeking. It's people who seek to. It's as old as the hills. That's never going away. Public choice theory is a huge area of economics, and you always have groups that, whether it's protectionists on one side or business people trying to get carve-outs for their own. You have this exists in society. It's part of it. The question is how to keep it so that it doesn't overwhelm your system. And I think one of the things that I think is very insightful is Eisenhower's farewell address in 1960, when he talked about the military-industrial complex. Mm-hmm. What he wasn't doing really was so much as talking about the military itself. What he was talking about was centers of power inside government. Whether it was the military at that time because of the Cold War, could have been anything where you have an incredible centralization of power. The whole point of a democracy is to splinter political power. So that is splintered in political parties, it's splintered in different levels of government, it's just splintered between the judiciary and our legislative branches. The whole idea is that you're splintering power. We even go to the point that one person, one vote. So nobody has a lot of power. And then the idea is that in our marketplace, in the market, we splinter economic power, that nobody has an absolute monopoly on the production of anything. Mm-hmm. And when every time you get this sort of the tendency is to want, and lots of people want to centralize power. Everyone wants to rule the world, kind of
well,
thing.
It's so convenient when you're just trying to do the thing that you're trying to do, but you have to understand.
Especially when you believe you're right.
Not everybody agrees with you. Not everybody agrees.
Especially when you believe. Yeah, especially when you're like any human being, you believe you're right, and you say, "Oh, I know what I'm doing," and if everybody just did what I said, the world would be so much better off. And that's how most people, when they want to centralize power, that tends to what they think.
But we know the horrors of what happens when we centralize.
Yeah, power. You don't want to centralize power. You want to. You don't like it, and that's an important message. Is that the centralization of power is a bad idea. Even if you think you're doing God's work, you should not. You should say, listen, the temptation once power has been centralized for people who might not be as pure as heart as yourself. Well, they now have all the keys to do what they want. And so that's why rent seeking can be very pernicious in a society. You want to find a way to say, look, there's a whole reason why we're having all of these, for lack of a better word, checks and balances. They go much further than the way our parliaments work. It's things how markets work and all that. But when you start saying, no, we need to centralize power to get things done, that's not good. That's the whole point of our system, is to not do that. And it's done for very good reasons. Even if at times it would seem more efficient and expeditious to say, look, let's just centralize power and we can get it all done. And even when you're doing it, when you have to, like the situation in the Cold War, Eisenhower's warning was, maybe we have to do this, but it's a two-edged sword, because it is really awful in a democracy to centralize power, because it's the thing that threatens it the most.
But it's this narcissistic flaw that we have as a human species, to think that, if we just had it all, and my ideas are so grand, but then they end up being grandiose, and it leads us down horrible. I mean, Mao, Pol Pot.
Yeah, I know. Exactly.
We have.
And if anyone's honest with themselves, I can barely figure out my own life. How am I going to tell everybody else how to live, right? I mean, if you really think about it, it's like, think of all the choices you make in your own life, and you think about all the dumb things you've done, and you think, I'm glad nobody knows I did that stupid thing. Imagine if you're like in charge of everything. It's kind of, it's a hard, the Hayekian humility is what people need, is to say, look, I don't know all the answers, and decentralizing power, and maybe things look stupid and the democracy chooses something silly. Okay, so what? It's better than having your anointed king deciding everything for you, or having any group of people that have really centralized power. That's the whole. And that's why I think with this, coming back to the mandate situation, is that when there's a fearful situation, people will say, but if you can get rid of the problem by centralizing power, I'm so afraid of this, I'm willing to do that. And I think that can be very dangerous to do. I think it's at those times that we need our democracy the most, right? When people say we should have just handed over the decision-making to public health officials, absolutely not. It should have remained in the political sphere, whether it was, and having different premiers making different ideas and different decisions, precisely because we need this. We do not want to hand the keys of the kingdom to a centralized agency that's going to say, this is the answer, because if they're not right, and there's been many times where the expert, what did John F. Kennedy say after the Bay of Pigs invasion? How could I have been so foolish to have trusted the experts? That's the thing that
but you want to be very careful. It's just going to be temporary. It's just going to be temporary.
Yeah.
We're just going to give.
Well, that's Milton Friedman.
Yeah. Okay. I know where you're going.
That's Milton Friedman again. Milton Friedman. There's nothing so permanent as a temporary government program, right?
You're quoting all my heroes tonight. Hayek, Friedman. Right?
Yeah. So yeah, it's and that's true, right? And so that's why the centralization of power is. Yeah, you want to be very careful. I don't care what the cause is, whether it's COVID, climate change, whatever it is, the centralization of power to rid us of the problem. Suddenly the centralization of power becomes the problem, and you'll wish you never did it.
Do we have a ticket out of here? Do we have a ticket out of this? So there's
I think we do.
A lot of people that they've swallowed that black pill. They think that, forget it, we voted ourselves into this. We're not voting ourselves out of it, and I'm not part of that, by the way. I'm not part of that group. Mm-hmm. But how do we lift the spirits of those people that think we're too far gone and that we can't bring it back?
I think a democracy like Canada is capable of correction. The beautiful thing about our democracy isn't that we make great choices all the time. In fact, we make a lot of wrong choices, maybe even most of the time. But the point is that we can change. And we've shown time and time again in this country that we can change, that things that we thought were okay and acceptable, we realize were wrong, and we'd make different choices going forward. Sort of sown in the seeds of the fabric of this country is to self-correct. I mean, the general strike of 1919, which I think is a great comparison. It has a lot of differences, but there are some similarities to what happened on my street here. And whatever your political persuasion, the leaders of that strike ended up forming the genesis of what eventually became the NDP. So I don't think too many people who are in the NDP party right now, I find it disappointing that they didn't look at the convoy here in Ottawa for those 3 weeks and said, just be a little bit careful. Our party started that way. If you're an NDPer, you should recognize where your party started. The general strike of 1919 was an enormous effect in Canada. Winnipeg at that time was the third largest city in Canada. This was no small place. And so I think that, and those were very working class people too. And they had, coming out of World War One, don't forget that whole general strike went on right during the influenza pandemic, right? So
was it triggered by that, or was?
No, it was not. It wasn't triggered by that. It was triggered by a lot of other grievances in the labor movement, which was echoing around the world, right? It wasn't.
Okay.
The Bolsheviks had just come to power in Russia. So
scary.
But the point is whether you agree with the politics of the strikers or not. Today they are talked about and discussed at length in the Canadian Museum of Human Rights, and yet the language that the government used at the time is exactly the language you hear today. They were seditionists. They were foreign influencers. They were looking to overthrow order and government. This is exactly the language that Arthur Meehan, who later became prime minister, he was a justice minister at the time, I think, he said those kinds of things. He made those kinds of comments. But today we see it very differently. We see the whole situation. It's like, no, there were some real problems coming out of World War One with working men and women getting back to it, and all of the hardship that had just happened, and yeah, there were lots of problems that had to get solved. And so the strike, like the whole city was on strike, all of Winnipeg. So you look at this and you think, we corrected in Canada, right? We don't, the same thing with the Ottawa trek in 1935 with the Great Depression. We recognize there were lots of mistakes made during the Great Depression. So I'm very faithful that Canada can learn from this, that we will learn from this. Not that we can, that we will. We've always done that. Our democracy has done that. And I think that there's a lot of hope that we will. I think that we should be very proud of the fact as a country we've always learned from such circumstances. And I think people like Tamara Lich will be seen in a much different light 20, 30, 40 years from now.
Watching her testimony was amazing. I think the thing that got me the most was a lot of people were vying for who's the head honcho of this convoy thing. And when she testified and everybody kind of saw her as like the lead, the main face of it, and she just said, this wasn't me, this was everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
And I had a big old lump in the throat when I heard that. Because
no, I understand.
That's what got everyone so motivated in the first place. It was that we saw our fellow Canadians who seemed to be at each other's throat or scared to mention anything to each other. I remember that sentiment of people just being like, so how about that COVID thing? Because they all know what they've been hearing in the news and they don't know who's on board with it and who's not. And there was real fear of like being allowed. Who's gonna break the mold? Who's gonna say that the emperor is not wearing clothes? Who's when is that gonna happen? And then the truckers took off. A lot of people. Not that they changed their mind all of a sudden. A lot of people just felt the courage to say it out loud. Finally.
Yeah. That's right. And it was a very courageous act. I looked at the people on my street and the thing that is what I felt was just to see it is just the different kinds of people that were there. It wasn't all just one type. That's why I really objected to this idea that it was a bunch of white supremacists or neo-Nazis. I mean, were the black people in front of my building neo-Nazis? Were they all white supremacists? Was the indigenous? I had a long conversation with indigenous people that were there. The one thing that I found surprising is they talked a lot about, interviewed in CBC in different places, interviewed indigenous people from around Canada, what they thought about it. But the guy who was 100 meters off the front door of my condo, who had a little charcoal barbecue behind his van, from a reserve up on Manitoulin Island, he told me while he was there, and I talked to them for half an hour, talked to a woman from a reserve up near Petawawa, and she told me while she was there, and you got a real sense that this was not this was a very Canadian moment, right? It was Canadian. That's the thing that people should recognize, that it had about the right combination of people that you'd expect to find in any group of Canadians. It was more representative than many things are in Canada. That's the thing that was amazing about it. So I looked at these people and thought, yeah, this is completely different than what I was seeing in the CBC. It was just or anywhere, actually. It wasn't just them.
I think what's
just being able to walk down the street.
I think it was an interesting concept is the fact that the idea of hurling the insult that somebody's a racist is almost proof that our society is so repulsed by that concept.
Yeah.
That to accuse somebody of being a racist is so repulsive to everybody that almost vindicates our whole society. That's a fact, because nobody is on board with that concept. And if there is anybody on board with that concept of other people being lesser human beings because of what any distinctive differences amongst each other, that could nobody even believes that could be a possible opinion of any individual. It's that repulsive. It's amazing to me that a lot of people don't see that as a concept and see that as
I agree.
Hey, maybe Canada's a great place after all, because everybody is going so far out of their way to not be accused of this horrible thing that we all agree is a horrible thing, right? So
that's right. And that's what I want people to take away from the convoy. I want to take away that we are a phenomenal country, that there's a lot of hope in this country to have, that we are overall a really good people, that whether our governments or politicians will make mistakes, philander, do silly things, that's never going to change. That's always going to be part of the fabric of any democracy. But what we can do is learn from circumstances, demand better from our leaders in the future, and we end up getting it. Usually, we end up getting better all the time. I think Canada's continues to improve, and it will continue to improve. And if we keep on this arc, I think that we'll be a much better country yet in the future than even we are today. And I think there's a lot of reason to be hopeful about that.
I agree. I have the cautious optimism, right? I know that pendulum swings, right? The pendulum swings, and it has the ability to swing the other way. And the people that are being the horrible vitriolic ones in today's life might become the victims down the road. And that's where I don't want to end up. And that's
right.
That's why we have to be vigilant in this. And
that's right. We've been whipped up in waves of hysteria before on all kinds of things in this country. A lot of it often forgotten in the bowels of history, but temperance movements and all kinds of things. This is one of those moments. It was a panic moment, and I think as we sort of sober up going forward, we'll recognize and say, that we did it. The next time something like this happens, we'll be in a situation where we'll be able to take the fear down, I hope, and not have to suspend civil liberties in a willy-nilly sort of way. I think that's a bad idea.
This concept of amnesty is something that's come up recently. And this is this idea that the people who were the worst offenders during the pandemic they're calling for this amnesty without having to apologize. Of course, we all did bad things. Of course, we all did when it's them that's asking for the forgiveness without the apology. But this concept has been pushed out that we should just forgive and forget, turn the other cheek. Let's not talk about it anymore. Let's move on. And now obviously the response to that is very angry, and no, so many people, they want vengeance, and I'm afraid of that, right? I don't want a feeling of vengeance, because that's just, you know, eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. But
I agree.
But how do we move past this in a way where people who have been trespassed against can feel vindicated, or feel like justice has been served, while, you know, still moving past and not having to damage a whole class of people in the process?
I think it's very hard. I can understand the emotional feeling on that some kind of compensation they would demand of some kind, and that the people responsible for it should be held to account. I think the way we hold them to account is at the election, is in elections at the voting booth. I think we should really push for governments that recognize that civil liberties are very important. It is important that people like the people on my street showed up those 3 weeks, that even if you think they were wrong, to be there, you have an element in this country that takes their civil liberties so seriously that there will protest even if you think they're wrong. That's an amazing thing about this country. To recognize that we do have a strong defense of civil liberties in this country. That's something that's important. How to hold people to account, I think, is going to have to be through elections. And you know, it's easy for me to say, if you say, "Oh, what should you just forgive and forget?"
There's that pendulum.
I don't know.
Though,
I mean,
that pendulum there. I'm talking about, because it could swing the other way, and then they elect in some vitriolic guy on the other side that behaves just
we don't
like
want that.
Trudeau was behaving during the heat of the pandemic, going on national TV, calling them names and doing all that kind of stuff. How do we avoid that, is what I'm saying.
I think people need to look at examples in history, and I think it maybe doesn't rise to the same level of what happened in British India with Gandhi, or with Martin Luther King Jr. in the United States for civil rights movements. Lots and lots and lots of people were harmed by extremely poor policies, more than poor policies, racist policies in the South in the United States. And if the United States had decided in the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King Jr. had argued that the solution is our pound of flesh, he wouldn't have achieved what he achieved. It's easy for people like me to say that. I understand that, but it's I think his example is the only one. It's the way you win. It's the way you can break the back of an empire like in British and India. If you're right, your moral position will be enough to change the world, and that is no small feat. That is no small feat. And I think that that's something that all the people who participated in the convoy and people who had real hardship brought against them, that I don't believe that should have been brought against them. I think that they should not have had to have lost their jobs. They should not have had to suffer the economic harm that they did. I think a lot of those people became the moral conscience for the country, and that's an enormous contribution to our society.
Yeah, amazing. I don't. I wish nothing but the best for Canada moving forward. I really do, and I have a hope in my heart, and I really do want that. But I do see elements of people that want more than just to bring things back to fairness. They want to have their pound of flesh. They want to have their vengeance, and I think just pushing this and bringing these thoughts to people, I think is the most important thing, and getting this point of view across to them, and talking to people, especially ones that you disagree with, and not in the. I've pitched this out for my channel. I know you and I we seem to agree on a lot of things, but I've pitched it out for people who maybe disagree with me on certain subjects, not to come on as like a debate me bro and internet blood sports or anything like that, but to actually find common ground. And I think that's the way forward. And I think I think trying to bring people back together is the path that we need, or else we do risk some serious hard times.
Yeah, I think we can avoid it. I think Canada is ultimately a good place, and I think that, like I said, I think there'll be a learning moment here. I think it's already beginning to happen. I think people recognize this. I think you're seeing the reticence for like the whole mask thing right now across all the provinces. Even though we've heard rumors and there's been right, you can see that all of the premiers recognize, no, this time's different. We can't. This is right. There's some learning that's going on. I
just had a young man on from with Wilfrid Laurier University, and he started a thing where he was wearing different items as masks because they were just as useless as the paper ones from the dollar store that they recommend to their students. And it went nationwide, and now a lot of some people are starting to copycat and whatnot. But it's just showing I say that ridicule is the word we use because it's deserving of ridicule. It's ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, it is. And actually, I wrote a blog post about why universities will be if there was going to be a mask mandate, it would be the university that would want to do it first.
And
there's a lot of signaling.
That's where
they have, and it's just there's a lot of signaling at universities, and signaling. And there's nothing that signals better than a mask. Because I see it in downtown Ottawa. I see this crazy stuff all summer long because I bike everywhere, and people wearing a mask, no light, going the wrong way, but they got a mask. There's no helmet, there's no lights, safety, and they're like, wait a second, what is he doing, right? You think, if you're serious worry about safety, the helmet's going to do a lot more than the mask. No one's caught COVID from the curb, but if you hit your head, right? And you can see it's signaling. It's total pure signaling at that point. It's signaling political beliefs. It's signaling a lot. I know a lot about that person right now without having me to talk to them. And I think universities have a big signaling component to their to their degrees. It signals more than people would like to admit. Instead of human capital formation, there's a lot of signaling that's going on, and masks, since they are a big signaling component of to wear them. Universities, that makes sense. So, they trade in signaling.
So two concepts there, and one is the one that in Japan they wear masks when they get sick. It's just a common courtesy thing because people are in tight quarters on trains and stuff. So, and I used to live in Japan for a while. My wife's from Japan, and when you get sick, you just put on a mask because you just don't want to like goober snot all over the people that are in close proximity. I made the argument that we could have been there, but because of people's vitriolic behavior, we went from almost there to everybody that wears a mask is a jerk. but the other concept of signals is not just masks. It's particular words that people use, and I find it interesting. So like I mentioned earlier, I don't say capitalism, and I don't say free market, because those, if you use either one of those words, it kind of tells people where your ideological stance is. And there's a lot of words like that people will use that mean one thing, but this group says it another way than another group, and they'll have particular terms that they use, and as soon as you hear that, it's a trigger. Oh, this guy's from that team. So
sure,
when I talk about the market economy, I say the market economy, and that one doesn't. That one is a little less. It's a little more vague, and people don't get triggered. Oh, this guy's one of those guys, right?
People should still read Capitalism and Freedom by Milton Friedman. That's really one of those books that's even though it's got the word capitalism, you should read it. It's even if you disagree with the ideas in it, he's no slouch. He's a pretty smart guy. So it's very much people. I think people should read that book.
Oh, absolutely. I'm just saying that people like today, because you go back and retroactively retitle it, but today people have certain words, verbiage that ID them, or they ID their ideology right out of the gates.
Yeah, sure.
And I don't know if there's a way out of that. It's kind of like like showing up with nose piercings and purple hair.
Yeah. People have been doing that. People have been doing that forever. I think signaling of one form or another is with humans to stay. I mean, we we're social creatures, and social creatures are going to signal. The thing about the universities doing this is actually there's some very interesting ideas about what a university degree actually does, and there's some very good. I have a little blog post about why the masking would probably happen there first.
And you were right, by the way.
Was it? Yeah, yeah. I was like, I saw Western and Fanshawe doing it, and I thought, oh yeah, that makes sense. The one that actually is teaching, that is trading and signaling the least, which is Fanshawe Technical College, is they're not going to require masks because they don't trade in signals. But
I heard from people that I know, and I'm not going to name names, but government employees that I know personally that say they still have to wear masks that never went away in their offices.
Yeah, I think that. Well, federal buildings are like that, right? Yeah. I think that's even true at the post office. I think that they do that. I'm not sure. I don't go to the post office, so I don't know. But I thought all federal buildings still had these mask mandate things. But yeah, I think it's it's unfortunate that it became that way. I think there have been a way to get greater buy-in, and I think it's about. I don't think saying that wearing a mask is necessarily a good idea, that it's going to do much. There's the very confused literature out there, and every healthy people wearing masks, or I don't know what to affect. Again, it's all about effect size, right? Effect size matters. Mm-hmm. It's not enough just to show that it has some prophylactic potential. You have to show the effect size is significant enough to create this kind of. People say there's not a hardship for wearing a mask, and I don't believe that for a moment. I think masks actually, for a lot of people, is a very large hardship. If it wasn't, they'd be wearing them all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I guess maybe if in cold weather, it's nice to have like a balaclava or
sure.
I wear a beard, so I'm okay.
Yeah, me too. but I look at it, but your face is a very expressive organ. You use it to keep your whole face is involved in communication. That's why we smile and frown. If you take away a third to half of the part of your communication. Like facial expression has been with us when we were a pre-verbal species. So to take that away is, I think, I don't think it's a trivial thing. I don't think people should say, it doesn't matter. It's super easy. Why? No, it is. It isn't. It's for a lot of people, it's a hardship. And I think we should recognize it as such. So again, issues of civil liberties and effect size, right? You can't just say, but it's better safe than sorry or something like that. It has more thought has to go into it. When you're taking people's liberties away, you have to really be careful.
Yeah.
Right?
and when it involves people's children, I think that's where it really.
Oh yeah.
Some people are. You do whatever you got to do to me, but if you get it in front of me and my kids, like that's where people draw.
Yeah, that's right.
Huge line there.
We talk about a society of individuals, but really we're a society of individual families, and really the atom of our society is the family unit. Whatever you define your family unit to be. But the point is that that's why you notice these things with children and whatnot, is that, we're a society of families. And I think, again, interfering with that is a very terrible, you got to be very careful. You got to be careful with that stuff.
Well, there's a whole argument to the postmodernists and the Marxists, the modern Marxists, as running attempts to dismantle the modern family, and that's the accusation that's coming from a lot of people at this. There's no, I haven't heard any open statements from politicians or something saying I want to dismantle the modern family, but it has been in the writings of a lot of intellectuals in those fields that they get a lot of their ideas.
I think. Families are important. They're foundational. I find it strange that people would want to undo that. They're the people who are likely to stick with you the longest.
Right.
Even when you don't deserve it. Right?
I absolutely agree. But it seems like there's a concerted effort on the behalf from. And we're talking about from intellectuals who never had families, these odd types, with postmodernism that say, well, society would be better if we branch off this way, and they use experiments like Plato's cave and stuff like that to justify why. And that goes back into what we were talking about earlier with the whole power grab, and if only I ran all of society, and I know the best way about it.
Yeah, that's right. If you want to live some sort of weird lifestyle, all the power to you. Like, I mean, go for it. I don't know, but leave other people alone.
I think that's the beauty of living in a free
Yeah.
society is you have the
Yeah.
opportunity to go off and make your own communes. I think to propose to your great dictator of your communist country, it would be hard to say, can we have a freedom commune over here where we can all live peacefully and
Yeah.
free? That's
exactly.
a concept you don't normally hear about.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. I mean, I could talk to you all evening. It seems like we have a lot in common, but what really sparked this was your article. And do you have a lot of you have I'm guessing a lot of other articles that you've written on your blog?
Yeah, I have other content. Yeah, I discuss these, the comparisons with the Ottawa trek and the strike of 1919 and a few other things that people might find interesting. The thing about the convoy, I've never made any money on this. Like, my blog is completely free. I don't do any advertising. It would be terrible to do so because these people they put a lot out there. So it's just my blog that there's ideas I put up there, and people like them or don't like them. It's okay. That's what it's for. And hopefully, I people will get a sense of, how I think a little bit and how how I see certain things. And certainly with this article, how I saw people on my street.
Yeah, it blew me away. Like it brought me right back to the original reason why I started making videos talking about this. And I can't thank you enough. Can't thank you enough for writing it.
Well, thank you very much for having me on your show.
Yeah, we should do it again sometime next time. You write something along these lines. But so I'm just gonna sign off here, and thanks for joining.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
And thank you guys for joining in this conversation. Amazing that we have this opportunity now with the internet to come together and share these ideas with amazing people that we meet along the ways. And well, I just want to thank you for joining in on this. Leave a comment in the comment section down below. Let me know what you think about all the different things that we talked about over this hour-long conversation. And well, we'll see you in the next one. Keep on trucking.